human psychology. I think it's horrendously unfair for young people to force work from home, essentially, which is kind of what you do if not everybody is in.
Adam Schwab. He went from corporate lawyer to co-founding Luxury Escapes, built it to over $1 billion in gross transaction value with 600 employees.
He's also one of Australia's most contrarian voices in business, author of Pigs at the Trough, host of the Contrarians podcast, and he just forced his entire team back to the office 5 days a week.
We're in a world now where we're in hybrid workplaces. What are your current views on this?
I've been pretty outspoken. Generally, whenever the media needs somebody to talk about remote work, good or bad, they get Scott from Atlassian, they get me from Luxury Escape. Scott obviously being a work from anywhere guy and me being the work from the office guy. Productivity is only a small part of it. The big part for us is retention. Our retention rates skyrocketed since we went back to the 4 and now 5 days a week in the office. The notion that people want to work from home, I think is a barrow pushed by a small number of people who really want that. You look at certainly younger people, they want to be in the office, they want to get promoted, they want to socialise, they want to be around their boss. Rightly or wrongly, really hard to get promoted if you're not in front of your knee person to making that decision. And some of the worst culprits are the 45-year-old managers. It's the Gen Zs, the Gen Xs and the boomers, but it's kind of people my age and above who aren't coming in, who then the people who work for them can't learn. We basically said, we want everybody in 5 days a week, or it was 4, now it's 5. If that doesn't work for you, then that's fine, but probably better off getting a job elsewhere.
Adam, welcome to Flow Zone.
Great to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Well, I got to meet you at a fireside chat with Wantrepreneurs organisation, and I saw this guy in front of me now, just pretty humble, pretty casual, but have done some incredible things. We've got a big audience here of entrepreneurs and people on the business ladder in some way. And I'm really curious to jump straight into the angle that you've taken on a lot of things. Pigs at the Trough, a decade of Australia's corporate greed, and your podcast, The Contrarian. So you've obviously got a contrarian view on a lot of things. So let's start with the big impact one. What do you think is the biggest lie being told in business today?
I think the pod's long enough to discuss this one. I think the problem with when you talk about business, I instinctively think to big business or enterprise, which obviously you and I are not at. We're at the kind of the scale-up stage. And I think if you look at enterprise, it's probably been 100 years, and Scott Galloway, who's a great podcast, talks about the greatest wealth creator being the American corporation. But I think if you look at it now, I think corporations, to a great extent, detract value from owners, and there's just this massive agency cost. And essentially my book, 15 years old now, but it really holds true, is really a book of agency cost, of how owners and management are two different entities, and managers often enrich themselves to the detriment of owners. And obviously if you're founder of the business, you run your own business, you don't have that. There's zero agency costs in our business because me and Jeremy are the largest shareholders and we run the business. But obviously the further you get away from that sort of ownership, the greater the agency costs. And you look at, I'm not sure how long ago this happened, but you look at the Optus issue with obviously owned by the Singaporean government now, essentially through Temasek. But Optus, who have had multiple issues, from the cyber attack to more recently the issue they had with the triple O outage, and that's just a split between owners and ownership and management, and there's too much of a gap, and as a result, other stakeholders, in this case Australian people, are suffering. So it's just that is rife through business, and obviously I love businesses where you can get much closer to ownership, where the person who runs the store owns the store.
Well, I think that's a great point. Like you mentioned it in corporate, in these big global giants or the businesses we see as huge corporates. But I've also experienced that in scale-up companies, in that sort of messy middle, that sort of 5 mil to sort of 50 mil, like in the private equity I'm involved in. That's kind of where we invest mostly. And, the amount of emphasis is placed on a key middle management hire, for example. And we really need this person, like whether it's a head of HR or, a team leader or a performance person or whatever. And they bring in that middle person like it's going to basically be the next step up for them. But then that middle person is kind of often the thing that kind of stops the company growing any further. And then the owner is kind of trying to make up for what that person's not delivering on. How do you see that play out in those sort of more middle order companies?
I think what you're trying to get at there is, how do you scale a business past a founder CEO, which is a question that clearly every founder grapples with. And so founders can do one of two things. They can stay with the business or leave the business. It's pretty rare. I've been with this business now 15 years. There was a small gap of a year in between where I sort of semi-retired for a year and came back. But all intents and purposes, been with the business 15 years. And you got other founders who leave in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, for example. And I think that's a whole sort of separate talk show. But essentially, as a founder, you want to try and create, and this is what I found certainly more recently, is how do you create that foundership mentality, that ownership mentality through the business? So you talk about hiring an HR manager. Well, you can hire an HR manager who thinks like a founder and you get an extension of yourself. That's a huge win. If you hire an HR manager who creates another layer of bureaucracy and who can't solve problems and who doesn't think like an owner, that's a big loss. So it really comes down, and if you think of those, so what are the key ingredients that is needed to be a great leader of a business, great CEO of a business, there's really kind of 3 or 4, but probably the most important is hiring and retaining a great team. So there's 2 different skills that you've got to hire. You've got to be able to select the right people, which is, in a business like mine, not hiring people out of banks, for example, because no disrespect people who work in banks, maybe listeners who work in banks, great, smart people, not a great fit for our business. So we won't hire out of a big bank. I won't hire out of Seek. I won't hire out of big Goliath businesses who have lots of powers and who don't need a sort of hustle and be gritty. It's just not the kind of person that we want in our business. They can be amazing people, by the way, just not appropriate for our business. So you've got to select the right person. Then you've got to be able to attract them. And one of the great follies of a job interview is people think, the interviewee or the person going for the job is trying to impress me, the interviewer. In many cases, it's the other way around. You as the interviewer should be trying to impress the interviewee. Why should you come and work for us? At the same time, being honest. No point saying stuff that isn't true because you don't want to get somebody on the false pretenses. So I'll always, during an interview, try and highlight the stuff that could be, inverted commas, bad, as well as the stuff that is considered good. So there's a couple of points. And the third thing, you've got to retain great staff. So you've got to find them, hire them, and then retain them. So that's probably the most important thing for a leader. And then you've got to allocate capital effectively. And then you've sort of got to be the head salesperson and head product person. So kind of 3 or 4 roles. Not everybody can do the sales role and the product role, I should add, but certainly in a startup you have to. But as you get bigger and bigger, you can get more and more people there. But essentially, if you're hiring and retaining great people, that bureaucracy problem shouldn't be that relevant. And obviously, as you get bigger and bigger, it becomes almost inevitable. But we've got 600 people now, but we've got a pretty lean team from ELT and SLT, and those ELT and SLT members are hand-picked and highly entrepreneurial. So that's not to say 100% are, but pretty close. So we want that entrepreneurial spirit through the leadership of the business. And as long as we've got that, I'm pretty confident there isn't that waste being created. Where you start hiring, if I hired someone out of a bank, for example, much more likely to be bureaucratic, and to your earlier point, not add a great amount of value. It's about picking the right people for your business.
Okay, yeah. How important are equity structures for those SLT senior leadership team members, do you think?
Depends a lot on the person. You definitely want to hire. Not everybody values equity how you value equity as an owner. So one key threshold is I want to make sure the person who's getting the equity values at least how I value it. So if I value the equity I'm giving someone at 300 grand and they value it at 100 grand, then we're better off not giving equity because it's just a value destruction. If it's the reverse and they value it equally or even more highly than me, then absolutely we should do it. So we have a pretty wide what we call performance rights plan. Not every single ELT, SLT person has it, but a lot do. And we structure it to align ourselves with our team, and we want our team to succeed if we succeed as well. So it's not simply a retention tool; it's also a success alignment tool. If we do well, our team deserves to do well, and none of our shareholders begrudge that for a second.
Yeah, I think the success alignment is a really critical one. And part of the reason for asking you is you've been through a journey of being smaller businesses, several smaller businesses, which we'll get into in a moment. But now that you get to that sort of 600 org chart and, like you said, senior leadership team, extended leadership team, it can really make or break what's happening, especially if the people at the spear point aren't really singing from the same songbook as far as what we're building towards. If people are on different time horizons, for example, about when things are going to start working out, that's straight away a bit of a rub. Yeah. So I suppose I'll digress from that. I heard you mention powers before, right? If the business has got big powers, and some of our listeners would be aware of 7 Powers, Hamilton Helmer. He's one of my favourite business authors. That tome of work on strategy and just long-term value in a company has been quantum for me in assessing, whether we're making strategic choices that are actually going to build enduring value. Why is 7 Powers the tool that you use so much and refer to so much on the podcast?
I think the beauty of it, it's so simple. There's 7 powers, really 6, because counter positioning is kind of an early power that
we should break them down as well, yeah.
I'll talk about counter positioning is one, which essentially you're disrupting an existing industry. For us, we counter positioned against a Booking.com or online travel agent, for example. So forget counter positioning for now because it's kind of an early stage power that eventually sort of goes away. So you've got 6 powers. One is the obvious one being brand. So without brand, kind of forget about it. You're almost it's almost impossible to have a great business without brand. There's a couple of small exceptions, and I won't go into that. But if you're listening, you probably aren't the exception. So you probably need to build a great brand, and it's a challenge in itself. But the question so much is brands are almost a given. Brand and is sort of the question. So there's kind of 5 other powers. One is scale. So can you build enough scale? And the great example of scale is the Netflix example that Hamilton uses in his book. And that's the point where Netflix can now create a show that amortizes over a billion viewers. So they can create a lot more content, a lot more cheaply on a per viewer basis, give a lot more value to customers, and really make the most of that scale benefit. I think of another great scale business. Actually, Booking.com, a competitor of ours, another example of great scale. As you get to the point where you can then amortize 500 analysts over a huge customer base of people, then you start getting some real scale benefits. Airbnb, another one. People talk about Airbnb having network, but I think Airbnb is more of a business of scale in that the more properties you have to view in London, for example, the better your experience is. So that as Airbnb gets more scale, so more sellers or more liquidity in the marketplace, the better it is for buyers.
Yeah.
You can argue that's a network effect as well. Network's really difficult. Very few businesses have a genuine network effect. It's really sort of a social network, a telephone. That's where each additional node creates more value to others. So, for example...
Yeah, it's got to be by the network economy, when someone else joins that network, it gets better for everyone inside of it.
Exactly. So you think Airbnb is talked about as a network business, but really I think Airbnb is more of a scale business. Facebook's more of a network business. The more people on Facebook, the more friends you have on Facebook, the more utility, and as you add, it becomes more valuable to other people. Same as a telephone. As you get a telephone, it's more valuable to other people with phones. So very rarely are there real network businesses. Often network and scale are kind of confused, and it's almost always scale. But if you can get a network, all the better, but pretty rare you get a network. And Google's another great example, great scale. As you can sort of build that ad universe out, they build this incredible scale. You can argue there's a reverse network effect with Google because the more advertisers there are, the less valuable because your bidding cost goes up.
Yeah, it's kind of more like the multi-level marketing schemes are a network economy. Well, that's why they call them network marketing, I suppose, because by getting more people on it, it's reducing the customer acquisition costs.
Yeah, unless you're at the bottom of the pyramid.
Unless you're at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah. But yeah, network, I think you can always, network is a really hard one to get. So brand and scale are the obvious ones. The really interesting one, and this is what we spend a lot of time on at Luxury Escapes, is switching costs. And you look at the business with great switching costs, classic one, SAP, Oracle, those big database, Xero, those big database businesses, Atlassian with Jira, really hard to change.
Yeah.
If you can get that switching cost in your business, that's a really big strategic advantage. And we sort of thought as Luxury Escapes, we had zero switching costs. Like most consumer businesses have very, very little switching costs. If you're Myer, you can go to David Jones. Well, yeah, you got a Myer One card. That's about the only switching cost you have. Otherwise, you're kind of selling the same commoditized product across the road.
Yeah.
Very little switching. If you're a milk bar, if you're a fish and chip shop, zero switching costs other than a bit of loyalty and a bit of brand. Maybe you can build some switching costs. But really, you want to try and build switching costs to or increase your lifetime value or reduce your CAC essentially. And at Luxury Escapes, we thought, well, how do we build switching costs? Because people can just go from us to Booking.com to Expedia to Airbnb to whoever without having to pay anything because we're just a URL. So we created a couple of loyalty plans. One's a paid loyalty we call Lux Plus, which people pay $250 a year for, and you get significant discounts through the year. And the other one we created more recently is called Society, which is a points earn burn status credit scheme. So the more you buy from us, the more status credits you get. As you hit sort of gold, platinum status, you get lots of free stuff, which is worth $1,000 potentially. So we are effectively investing in our customer and trying to save money on, call it Google, Meta, etc. I use Google as a kind of a placeholder for any kind of acquisition marketing. So we're trying to build switching costs to create an arbitrage. Instead of having to rebuy a customer and paying that money to Google, I'd rather give a bit of a discount to the customer that isn't as much as I would have had to pay off to Google. But we want to give, obviously, maximise customer utility as well. So we set about building that, again, a lot based on Hamilton Helmer's theories. Like, how do we build switching costs in our business? We looked at Qantas as being that incredible example of a great travel business with amazing switching costs.
Oh man, that's like Qantas and Mecca would have to be two of the best ones.
Absolutely. Mecca almost a better. Mecca's such an incredible business, and their Loop program has unbelievable switching costs, even though it's a pretty basic program where you get a free box every month, you got to go and get it and all that kind of stuff. So it's a super smart program, and that I think is a massive reason why Mecca has won, whereas every other sort of competitor has been, even like Sephora, which is an amazing business owned by LVMH, has been killed by Mecca in Australia. Adore Beauty, which was a great business, has been killed by Mecca. So I think Mecca, through its switching cost and its brand, and to an extent its scale, has got three great powers. And we look at us as Luxury Escapes, we've worked on brand for a long time. we think we're getting a bit of scale, certainly where we're strong. So in Bali, we're the largest supplier of Bali hotel rooms globally. So we've got scale in Bali, we've got scale in Maldives, we've got scale in Fiji, not globally, but in our specific niches, we've got incredible scale to the point where we're the number one supplier. So the third sort of leg of the chair for us was how do we build some switching costs to make sure people are coming back to us? And the data we see on Lux Plus and Society is once people sign up to either of these programs, they become far, far more rust-selling customers for us.
Yeah, okay. That's good. So does that mean you might be getting to one of the other powers there, the cornered resource, where you've kind of tied up deals that other people aren't going to be able to go and recreate now because it'll just be not worth their while?
Yeah, so cornered resource and process power are really intrinsically hard powers to understand. So you're looking at Hamilton and cornered resource. He calls a founder a cornered resource. So you can argue as a founder-led business, we got a sort of cornered resource there. As in Apple and Steve Jobs. No one else has Steve Jobs.
But is it inherent value that can be held after you're gone?
No, the cornered resource isn't forever.
Business
but no
doesn't care.
power is forever.
Yeah.
A brand eventually goes.
Yeah.
So switching costs can go. Obviously, the stronger the power, the longer it holds. But you could argue that our deals, so our Bali deals, for example, which nobody else has, are a cornered resource. It's probably a soft cornered resource. The strongest cornered resources are probably like if you own a rare earths mine that nobody else other than China owns, that's probably more of a cornered resource because literally nobody else has it.
Yeah.
Our deals are probably more scale, like as in scale economies give us the buying power to get these deals and nobody else can. That sort of turns into a quasi-cornered resource in a way. So you're not wrong, but it's a hard one to sort of describe. And same with process power. We've probably got weak process power. I think the great process power business is Toyota.
Okay.
And we sort of put probably a Nintendo and a Netflix in process power in a soft form in that Nintendo can create games that are the best games in the world for a fraction of the costs of other Sony and Microsoft. And same with Netflix. Netflix can create a great show for much less cost than so actually not Netflix, I should say HBO is that classic. Netflix is the opposite. HBO can get an Emmy for a fraction of the cost of Apple and Netflix and Amazon. So that's another classic example of process power. In my mind, process power is operational excellence over a period of over generations.
Yeah, so, like IKEA would be an example of process power, surely.
Yeah, and scale economies and brand.
Yeah, when you've got multiple powers compounding on each other, that's a proper flywheel.
Well, I think if you look at probably a business that has all of them, it's probably Google. So counter position originally against Yahoo or whatever, but it's obviously got brand. It's got this weird network thing. It's clearly got scale. It's got cornered resource in its process. It's got heaps of process power, and it's got massive switching costs because where else can you go? So it's probably, and Microsoft probably, there's only a handful of businesses that have all, and Google's the most profitable business in the world, probably because it's got all those powers. So there is and this is why Hamilton's been a great investor as well as a great consultant, is there's a great link between shareholder value creation and building genuine powers.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hey, if you're getting value from these conversations, the best way to support the show is to follow, subscribe, and leave a rating. It helps more people discover the podcast and allows me to keep making these episodes packed with value. Thanks so much in advance. I think that's something that is kind of being, I won't even say it's being discarded. I just think it's being overlooked with a lot of these like hustle culture founder businesses that are coming up now, because there's no doubt we're in the age of AI and personal brands, in my opinion. And we're definitely in the age of AI. And I think that one of the biggest significant shifts that's happening during this age is also the move towards personal brands. So straight away, a founder is potentially a cornered resource and is also the brand that is getting more attention now than brands on their own. And most brands are made up with a whole collective of individuals. But previously, you were just seeing pictures of people on websites or the occasional ad that might have a staff member in it. Now brands are made up of the personal brands within them. How do you see personal brands impacting on brand power in the era that we're in right now?
I think the classic example is Elon and Tesla, and we've seen both sides of it. So Tesla was able to, and Elon didn't found Tesla. Famously, he basically bought it and saved it from the two actual founders. So Eberhard and I forget the other guy, Martin Eberhard and is it Martin Tappening or whatever his name was, Mark Tappening. But Elon built Tesla using his own brand and basically paid zero marketing dollars. And then as his brand became somewhat toxic post Trump 2, suddenly we had an unwinding of that personal brand with Tesla. So we've seen the ups and downs, and it's clearly fraught with risks. You can do it really well, like Steve Jobs did with Apple, like Elon did it with Tesla in stage one, but then it can unwind and it can be really toxic as well. So I'm not sure it's a good or a bad thing. I think it's a sort of case by case, and it's a case by case within a case by case, as the airline example shows. But the interesting sort of dilemma that you often have of running a business is, should we take positions on stuff? And my co-host out here says you should never take a position, short of it being really relevant to your business. I'm probably less forthright. I think if you look at an example of a brand taking a great position, Alan Joyce, when he was reviled at Qantas, leading the gay marriage plebiscite, and I think that made sense. I think it matched Qantas's brand. I think it was great for Alan's brand. And Alan obviously lost the plot later on and disgraced himself. But before that, he was an incredible CEO, and attaching that brand and attaching the plebiscite with Qantas was a great thing. So it can be really good. And then we saw with Alan, and it just unwound. The celebrity CEO became toxic, and he became a massive detriment to Qantas brand. So there is a bit of an Icarus moment with this stuff. So to an extent, the safe choice is to not associate a personal brand with a corporate brand, but you can get a lot of arbitrage value there if you do it right.
Yeah, and I think safe choices aside, like I'm talking to a contrarian here as well. That advice that Adir has given, like don't take a position on anything, but it still comes with a subject too. If it's in your industry or it's very relevant, I think there's almost always something relevant to every industry, and the majority of people are probably still taking the safe side as leaders or founders of businesses, that like, we're just not going to comment on that because we might be, come across a certain way.
You might offend 25% of your, 50% of your customers, which is understandable.
Yeah.
You've seen what happened at Target in the US with the DEI stuff. They offended half their customer base and they flipped them, and the other half, they offended everybody. So I think you've got to be honest in your belief. I think Alan Joyce with the Qantas stuff was honest in his belief, and it came across genuinely and it worked. Probably the most outspoken I've been was during COVID. Obviously, being a travel business, we certainly stood to benefit commercially from things opening. But my personal view happened to match the corporate view. And in hindsight, it's turned to be the correct view. I don't think anybody doubts now that what governments did in COVID was horrifically wrong and stolen from the poor and given to the rich and damaged a whole generation of kids. And we're seeing this now play out in Victoria with a horrendous lost generation of sort of 15 to 25-year-old males especially, and the crime rates flying, and the university rates dropping, and the school rates dropping, and all the stuff the government did horrendously during COVID. But it wasn't popular to stand up and talk about it at the time, but it conveniently happened to match what our business needed. So I could probably get away with it in both senses. But there definitely were people who said, I'm never buying from Luxury Escapes again because Adam's views. They were a small number. But we started to ride those bumps, and I was pretty confident that we're taking the moral position first and foremost, and commercially it was also good. If one of those two things didn't match up, so if it was commercially stupid or morally wrong, we couldn't have taken that. But we were obviously matched that top left quadrant or top right quadrant, however you want to say it, perfectly. So we sort of got away with it and hopefully made a difference in, I'm not saying that we helped really in any material way, but hopefully made some sort of small difference in helping Australians lift out of that.
Look, no doubt it would have had an impact on the people that were taking notice of your messaging at the time. And look, I understand that you can offend 50% of a customer base, but I would put it to a lot of founders that are having that dilemma at the moment, that you're offending 50% of a potential customer base. Like, if they're going to flee your business, are they actually there because they really want to participate in doing business? Or have you just been like the equivalent of a convenience store that has a donut when I feel like one? Because like, I think that when you do take a position on something, and I'm not fully formed on this theory yet, but I feel like it's the way it's playing out, that when someone takes a position on something, yes, you might divide half the audience, but the other half gets stronger. Whereas if you're just trying to be, something to everyone, well, you're nothing to no one. And whether you offend 25% or 50% of people, those people weren't definitely going to go with you. So
I think you've got to match it. Like, if you look at Elon, he offended when he did the whole Doge stuff. And I actually agreed with the Doge stuff, but most Tesla buyers are Democrats and they hated it. So that was pretty dumb. Like, you don't want to offend 90% of your constituency. When we did the COVID stuff, most people who were agreeing with me were our customers. So the crazy mastering people who were too scared to leave the house probably weren't really our customers. So I probably wasn't losing any customers. But if I was offending our best customers who were buying from us all the time, then it would have been more problematic. So you sort of got to look at who you're offending as well, and who you're potentially trying to sort of win over and solidify. So that's probably a value judgment you have to make as a leader, and you don't want to get it wrong because it's a bit of a one-way door.
Yeah, well, and I'm hearing there that it might be sensible to have a bit of a matrix, like just a red 10 check. You said there if there was like two things and it was going to support the business and da-da-da, then you wouldn't have done it unless it was both too. And it might be good to have someone in your corner saying, hey, what angle are we taking on this at the moment? Even if it's founder content over here, it's not on the main page, it's still going to get back that this founder's saying this about its business.
Well, look at Elon. He maybe was morally right with Doge, but commercially was stupid. So he didn't tick both boxes, and that's why it's been a net negative. Like Tesla may get over it. Like ultimately, Tesla was probably struggling commercially anyway. So it kind of happened at the same time. So they kind of overwrought each other. And Tesla's now becoming a robotics business, and he's more confident about Optimus than he is about sort of cars. But Tesla's being overawed by BYD anyway, regardless of Elon's sort of journey to the mire and annoying half his customer base, or more than half his customer base. So that was a tricky one to attribute sort of exactly where the reasoning was for Tesla's difficulties in recent time. And admittedly, Tesla's market value now is still 1.1 trillion, as highest it's ever been. So it hasn't impacted the share price yet because it's still got those rusted on cult believers and in shareholders for some reason. But ultimately, its performance commercially has been bad, but it may have been bad anyway.
Yeah, well, I'm a Tesla driver and I'm a major fan.
Yeah,
and
as am I.
Yeah. So, like, you know, what I saw with that, without hanging on this topic too long, like Tesla's cause is much bigger than a short-term share price, in my view. Like, I actually genuinely do believe he wants to extend human consciousness and get us to Mars. So he's got a conglomerate of companies that technically all have powers by flywheeling off each other. X was a good move to get the platform of Twitter. You know, he needed to get some government efficiency happening so he could spearhead his space projects, his internet projects, his gigafactories he's building, you know, to accelerate the pathway for sustainable development in things that have an environmental angle to them. So, and that will benefit Democrat voters eventually anyway, because the planet's getting better. He just had to go through a really messy, ugly period of eating glass while that was going on. Whether it was thought out, I don't know.
Well, Elon's a tough one because you've got Tesla, which I think is massively overvalued, like 90% overvalued. But then you've got Starlink and SpaceX, which owns Starlink, which is an incredible business. So SpaceX itself is a hugely profitable, fantastic business. Starlink is an unbelievable business that could dominate not just satellite internet, but also phones going forward, which is just starting to happen now. So you've got it's a $500 billion business that Elon owns 43% off. Don't forget. So that's the majority of his net worth. Tesla's now a minority. He only owns 12% of a $1 trillion business. So his stake in Tesla's like $100 billion or just under. His stake in Starlink's like $200 billion. So SpaceX is $200 billion. So like SpaceX is an incredible business and has fantastic powers, genuine cornered resource. When you got, I don't know, 8 million satellites in the air, whatever he's got, and the next is like 500,000. That's a genuine cornered resource. And Amazon's trying with Cooper and they're miles behind. And there's a European Eurosat thing that's even further behind. So it's almost impossible to see anybody catching up, given that they also own the sort of payload getting it up there. Yeah. So that is SpaceX is a genuinely incredible business with real powers, scale, cornered resource, process power, because they're the only one to get a Falcon up in the air.
Yeah.
Obviously got brand. It's got 4 to 5 genuine powers. Tesla, I'm not really sure has that many powers at all now. Like if you look at what does Tesla have that BYD doesn't, not much. BYD's got more scale. It's got as good if not better process power. It's got as good if not better brand. So Tesla's powers are pretty minimal, which is why I'm much more bearish about it versus SpaceX. Unbelievable powers. I'm super bullish on SpaceX.
Yeah. I think the amount of data that Tesla's got from having basically robots on the road for many years longer and being a robotics company as well, like in the age that we're in, I think that could help. But
he may get there on self-driving, but you've got Waymo anyway, which is incredible. It's further ahead now. So even if he does get there on self-driving, and maybe he's got a cost advantage because Waymo is quite expensive with LiDAR. So that may be where he gets there. And I think the robot stuff may be again, but there's a couple of moonshots, pardon the pun, with Tesla, whereas SpaceX, the real moonshot, feels a lot less like a moonshot. I forget the Mars stuff, which is a bit like a nice to have. It's SpaceX core business is unbelievable. Nobody can match what it does. Nobody can get anybody off the space station other than him. Like Boeing couldn't do it. And if you look at what Starlink is, it's the only way you can. If I'm in I took an Emirates flight back last week. It doesn't have. It's got not Starlink. It's got something else. Qatar's got Starlink. Like one doesn't work, one works. Yeah. One's super fast, one doesn't work. Like it's an unbelievable product.
There's that much difference, isn't it?
Yeah. So Elon's such an interesting case, but. If I look at trying to analyse the value of his businesses, the powers, Hamilton Helmer's framework gives an unbelievable head start in doing so.
Yeah, strong book recommendation there from both of us. So you've got a podcast of your own, The Contrarians. Why did you start that in the first place?
I had a previous podcast, a bit like yours. So I'd speak to founders and we'd go through a story and chat about stuff. And as you know, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I, between the sort of preparation, the editing, and I actually had idea on, told his story. Then I actually had him back on for a few episodes. We just chatted about business stuff, no preparation. We could just come and have a yarn. And that was a podcast with Listener, one of the big sort of podcast networks.
Yeah.
And then we went our separate ways because they're just not necessarily a business focused podcast network. They're a bit more sort of pop culture, entertainment, etc.
Yeah.
And we just said, well, let's just do it. I said to him, why don't we just do this ourselves? Like we can control the content. We can do marketing. We've got somewhat followings online, so we'll get it out there. And it turns out our audience is way bigger now than it was before. We actually work with 9 now who do our sort of partnership stuff, our sales stuff. But we do sort of everything. We do editorial. We do all the content. We both help with marketing. So 9 does marketing. We do marketing. So now it's a nice blend. And we just gave it a crack and just had a great chemistry. He's a super smart guy. Gives it interesting. We often agree on stuff, but definitely not always. Which is kind of
I sort of like that. I like it. You're contrarian with each other too.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like emo kids, they all think they're individual, but they're actually all acting the same.
Well, nobody wants to hear people just agreeing with each other. So we'll take different positions that will sometimes vehemently oppose each other and hopefully try and change the other's mind. And often we do.
Yeah.
Often we can. So we do it because we like it. And we love spending. And it is actually really handy. I'm sure you've found this as well the most important job, Scott Galloway says, for a leader, CEO, is being able to be a great storyteller. And you can bring the future forward, raise capital at a good rate, and be able to sort of create a great business. And you're also telling story. And when I say telling stories, I don't mean saying stuff that's not true. I'm saying explain this in the best possible way. But if I'm speaking to my team, how do you motivate and inspire your team without telling them stuff that's not true? You don't want to give too rosy a forecast about your business because you don't want to sort of lead people up the garden path and think they can rest on their laurels. Sometimes you're going to be too negative because you don't want to dishearten people. So it's giving a really honest appraisal whilst keeping them engaged and really hungry. And same with investors. How do you speak to investors? You can never mislead an investor, but you want to try and make sure investors are paying you the right amount for the future cash flows of your business. So, and being fair to existing shareholders as well as new shareholders coming in. So being able to tell a story is a really important characteristic of a founder. And Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hour rule. The more you do something, the better you get. And I haven't done 10,000 hours of podcasting, but every hour you do, you get better. And you can think on your feet, you can argue, you can build a cogent argument, and you can also get great perspectives. I didn't know about Hamilton Helmer, for example, until Idea told me about it sort of 2 years ago. Yeah. So I've learned a heap of strategy from Idea. He's one of the best strategy guys in Australia, probably. He's chairman of Catapult, which is a multi-billion-dollar business in a super competitive. The global leader in sports tech is based out of Melbourne, pretty incredible. And Idea's been the master strategist, taking it from 8 million to 2 billion, with obviously the founders being brilliant as well and some great CEOs as well helping him. But having the ability to leverage off a strategic mind like that and learn from him every week, as I do, as our listeners can as well, is a real privilege and something I love doing. And if we didn't love it, we weren't learning, we wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, there's got to be a drive there that's beyond the financial resources, but giving a bit of an insight to some of our listeners and viewers here, many of them have got podcasts of their own. And I think most people at the moment are just following that, do the reps. You got to do more pods, you got to do better, you'll get better, eventually it'll work. Yet there is a time component, there's an energy component. I think most people are getting over the kind of, embarrassment side of it now, and it's really being encouraged to come forward with how you are as a person. But you've got some pretty decent sponsors on the contrarians. Like, what sort of ballpark, value is that per year, or what do you think it could get to in near term?
We think we can do revenue of well over $1 million a year for the pod pretty soon. Which in the scheme, like 0.1% of the pods get like 99.5% of the pod revenue globally. So you got the Rogans and the Galloways and the really and the Switches and the big pods get a huge amount of revenue, and then everyone else has nothing. And we're sort of ironically not the middle, but probably close to the top 1%, but probably not in the 0.1%. So we've got I think the difference between us and maybe other pods is not so we've got a really high quality audience, a bit like your audience of entrepreneurs, founders, fund managers, VCs, etc. So it's a really high quality audience. It's leveraged off our LinkedIn profiles or whatever else we had to launch this. I've probably got across my socials, I don't know, 40,000. Idea's probably got 20,000. That was a handy start.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of word of mouth after that. So then it goes for sort of the core is your social audience, and then you go from referrals after that. And Acquired was a classic example of going from 100 listeners to 1.5 million episode.
Well, yeah, I think you tipped me off too, quite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you tipped me off. So
well, there you go. And as soon as I started listening to it, I'm like, these are my people.
Yeah.
The eps are a little bit long for me. Like, I struggle with a 2.5 hour.
It's hard in one session, but
Yeah.
I listen over 2, 3, 4, 5 days or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they were a great example of a, and they call themselves Meza Podcast, and we sort of take a similar method that when we get a sponsor, we'll work with them to craft the ad, and now with 9 as well, we'll generally voice most, if not all, our ads, and we'll help write the ad. So we think we know our audience, and we'll make sure that ultimately we want our partners to get a great result. If their partners aren't getting a great result, which is getting customers, getting a lower cost customer acquisition than other ways of advertising, we want to make sure that they can do that. So when we voice an ad, we want to work with people who we like and we know and we trust. So we aren't going to put our brand with someone dodgy. It's not worth it for us. So our listeners know that if I'm talking about our SEM guys or Airwallex or whoever we're working with or Aussie Broadband, one of us use that product or both of us use that product and we know we can trust it. And that way, if I'm talking about Digital Minds Group, who's worked with us for 10 years at Luxury Escapes, I've had probably 15 people say, "Oh, Adam, who do you use for SEM?" I'll use them because you must have chosen someone good. And they've got a heap of customers for a tiny CAC, way lower than every other channel. So we want to try and give that for all our customers. So as well, we have the highest CPMs probably in Australia for our show. So because we do put the most amount of work in, we voice the ads, we don't just run programmatic stuff. So we invest really heavily in our partners, and we only choose a small number of partners, and we might have them on the show. So we'll only have somebody on the show if we think they've got a good product that is worthy of coming on. We have people obviously asking to be on the show every week, and sometimes they just don't work with us. Most of the time they don't work with, as in they don't work with our audience. We don't produce great content. So we are very selective, and we try and find the right partners. So I think a lot of monetizing the pod, and we didn't set out to monetize the pod, by the way. We just wanted to just cover our costs essentially. We cover the cost of production, which, as you know, isn't hugely expensive. We'd be happy. And then we got to the point where we think we can add some value to our partners. So as a result, it kind of works commercially. It's kind of getting the cart and the horse in the right order rather than just trying to make money. If you just go out there and try and make money, I think you're going to, like with business, I think if you go and try and make money with business rather than solve a problem, you're going to struggle. And it was the same for us with the pod.
Yeah. No, that's making good sense. And look, I think I've heard there with what you've said before, like it's good for signaling to your team. It's good for signaling to investors. It's good for signaling to potential customers, like, because they're actually out there as well. Like, pretty much everyone listening to your pod is going to be one of those three things.
We'll talk about Luxury Escapes a lot in context. Like, we don't, Luxury Escapes doesn't sponsor the pod specifically, but if there's a reason I can talk about Luxury Escapes and give my view based on what we've experienced, I'll talk about it. And I do the same with Catapult. So we don't use it. They're not brand vehicles for us, but if it's contextual and makes sense and I think we can add value to our listeners, then we'll talk about it. And if we're talking about travel stuff or points hacking stuff, all that stuff that I sort of have a bit of expertise in now because of my day job, then we'll obviously talk about it. But it's got to be contextual. I can't start talking about Lux if it's not relevant.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, if you're getting value from these conversations, the best way to support the show is to follow, subscribe, and leave a rating. It helps more people discover the podcast and allows me to keep making these episodes packed with value. Thanks so much in advance. In case someone doesn't already know every bit of detail about it, we'll just go over the milestones here because I'm interested not so much in the whole journey because I've seen plenty of your pods and stories with the journey. But you've gone from corporate lawyer, then you've gone out into a very boutique sort of backpacker style travel business, which you learn a lot of lessons along the way there.
Certainly did.
And then there's this pivot into Zoupon and coupons and the like.
Yeah.
So can you just give us the bouncing ball there, like how this ended up in Luxury Escapes? Because I'm actually now interested in what comes after Luxury Escapes, or at least what your mindset is at the moment. But let's just
I'll give you the quick version because the whole version is a whole episode in itself. But the quick version is I was a lawyer, Jez was a banker, 2004. Entrepreneurship isn't cool at all, but Jez, to his great credit, is a really great contrarian thinker himself. And well before being a founder was the in thing, Jez wanted to be a founder. And he pushed me, to his credit, and we started a business that we thought we could solve a problem with, which was providing apartments for backpackers. And it was not glamorous. It was the opposite of glamorous. We literally would go in and rent an apartment and buy secondhand furniture and put it in the apartment and then show back. And we were 24, 25 at the time. So we were that age where we kind of could have been backpackers. But it was literally building the furniture, getting rid of the rubbish, doing all the hard stuff. We got to 50 apartments, or even 55 apartments at one point, but it was a hard business. Backpackers, as lovely as they are, can be tricky sometimes. So we Did our first small pivot to a corporate apartments business. Eventually the same thing, better furniture, better apartments, easier customers, higher paying customers. Did that for a few years, bought and sold some apartments as part of that, and then had this $1 million seed fund of our own. We were 28. I saw a business called Top Table in the UK, which is effectively a food ordering business, but like an early version of Eat Club, essentially, which has been a great business that Pan's started.
Okay, so not like a menu log or anything at that stage.
And twist on menu log.
Yeah. Okay.
We then converted it into a menu log business and then eventually sold to menu log, ironically. And we actually got $20 million as part of that exit for a business that was worthless. So it was the luckiest. That was sort of on the side. So we had that sort of running on the side terribly. So hence the 20 million was the greatest windfall, undeserved windfall in history of Australian business. But we went from that, then we saw the Groupon thing happening in the States. It was going crazy. Quickest business to $1 billion in TTV ever. Huge margins. We started doing that. So did 82 other people in Australia. Did that for a couple of years, realised unit economics were really hard. Your lifetime value was challenged, your CAC was high, your commissions are being squeezed. There was a lot of issues with it. And then we realised travel, though, as a sort of subset of that business, was a great business. So we started doing effectively Groupon for travel, and then realised, actually, we need to create a proper brand, make it look nice, add proper travel elements with like calendars and that sort of stuff, and became Luxury Escapes, essentially, which is a specific travel business, and then just turned it into a genuine sort of online travel agent over the next 10 to 12 years, adding a heap of stuff and just learning how travel worked. We had no idea. Even 5 years ago, when we created what we call our marketplace, which is like a mini booking.com, there were so many nuances to the travel sector we didn't understand, and we learned along the way. We literally built the plane as it was sort of coming down, because part of the advantage we had, the advantage and disadvantage obviously is we had to learn it. The advantage is we weren't stuck in the ways like every other travel business. So we could genuinely disrupt counter position against incumbents by doing something different. And we've been able to beat most. If you look at sort of the Australian travel business, forget Booking and Expedia and Airbnb, which are global businesses, but you look at Australian travel business, even WebBeds is really a European business. John's started in Australia but went to Europe. You've kind of got Hello World, Webjet, Flight Centre. Flight is still an incredible, massive business, 25-year head start on us, but we sort of feel like we're Flight Centre 20 years ago in a way. So Flight Centre started in 82. We feel like we're Flight Centre 93, 94, or actually 30 years ago, just before it listed, essentially. So they've been an incredible business. Hello World, we've overtaken. Webjet, we've overtaken. I think we've probably overtaken. So probably I think, whether it's biggest or best or whatever, probably the second most significant travel business in the country, leisure travel business. And Flighty's leisure business is still probably about 8 times the size of us. So they're still much bigger than us. But
headroom available, though.
But if you look at profitability, we could be making, maybe take us 5 years to catch them in leisure. They've got an incredible corporate business, and that's a different beast. But if you look at their leisure business in Australia, we could probably catch it in 5 years. We won't catch them as a whole business because they've pivoted to corporate. But if you look at our growth rate, what we've been able to achieve, we are sort of up there in the conversation as being one of the most significant travel businesses in the country, probably the strongest travel brand, or alongside Flighties. So we're super proud of coming from nothing and not having a clue what we're doing. Even sort of 7 or 8 years ago, we were sort of fumbling around a lot, to being able to be in the conversation of being probably one of the best travel businesses in Australia.
Oh, it's definitely in the conversation. And, like we're talking now, like gross transaction value annually of over $1 billion. Enterprise value still going through that because, the way that you've got to value things up, but we're probably over $500 million, and you could say a lot more than that depending on which rule you're using, right?
Yeah, exactly. Valuation's a bit more subjective.
Yeah.
And we're profitable. We're growing profitability significantly. So ultimately, if you look at the business as the value, it's some of its future cash flows. We think we're building a really significant business, and we're really investing in how do we build those competitive advantages, how do we build those powers, how do we build those switching costs. We've never been about short-term profitability.
Yeah.
We could be much more short-term profitable than we are. We choose to invest in things that we think will give us competitive advantage in the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years. So we want to build a generation, like a Flight Centre, we want to build a brand that's around in 50 years' time. And that involves making long-term greedy decisions, not short-term greedy decisions. And we are profitable, and we do have a focus on profitability. We're 600 people is relatively lean for what we do. And we've kept that at 600 for the last 2 years, really. So we've been able to grow revenue significantly without growing people. Yeah. And actually shrunk marketing last year while growing revenue 25%. We could have grown 50% easily, but we intentionally focused on how do we grow contribution margin? Yeah. How do we become more profitable? So we're very long-term focused in how we grow the business.
Look, it's incredible to hear some of those lessons unpacked on your podcast, and I'm still getting a lot out of it today. I suppose we're not going to get to all the steps of your journey along the way here, but I am interested in one topic I've heard you talk about on the contrarians, and it is something that affects profitability a lot. We're in a world now where we're in hybrid workplaces. You've got bricks and mortar now as well, right? So that there's offices to work from, and then there's also display suites or galleries or agencies to work from. And then there's a myriad of other things that you can have of where you could work from. And I've heard you speak on the topic of whether it's truly more productive to be able to work from home or not. So what are your current views on this?
So I've been pretty outspoken. Generally, whenever the media needs somebody to talk about remote work, good or bad, they get Scott from Atlassian, they get me from Luxury Escapes, and we take the counter position. Scott obviously being a work from anywhere guy, and me being the work from the office guy. And for me, it's not just about productivity is a small part of it. I'm not saying it's irrelevant, because I think great people can be really productive at home. And we've got some people who work from home, and we're not 100% of people in the office 5 days a week. Our default is 5 days a week. But if you've got a reason to be flexible, most often caring for kids, caring for parents, handicap, personal issues that require you to work from home. There's a bunch of reasons why we have legitimate flexible work, but it's got to be a real reason.
Yeah.
Like can't be bothered coming to the office is not a real reason.
Yes.
Like caring for your mum who's not well is a real reason. So we'll work around obviously people who need to, and we also are very flexible. When we say 5 days in the office, that's not saying you got to get in at 8 and leave at 8. We're not China, like 669. We'll be as flexible as we can to accommodate. Like we don't want to come in for an hour. That's obviously taking the piss. But if someone comes in at 8 and has to leave at 3 to take the dog to the vet, that's completely fine, and no one will ever say no to that. So we'll be as flexible as possible within boundaries. But productivity is only a small part of it. The big part for us is retention, and our data shows really clearly that people who work from home have a significantly higher attrition rate than people who work from the office, like double as much. So, and we've seen that. So our retention rates skyrocketed since we went back to the 4 and now 5 days a week in the office. So the notion that people want to work from home, I think is a barrow pushed by a small number of people who really want that. But I think if you look at certainly younger people, they want to be in the office, they want to get promoted, they want to socialise, they want to be around their boss. Rightly or wrongly, really hard to get promoted if you're not in front of you or near the person making that decision. And you can argue that's unfair. I would agree with you. It is unfair, but unfortunately, we can't complain about human psychology that is human psychology. So I think it's horrendously unfair for young people to sort of force work from home, essentially, which is kind of what you do if not everybody is in. And some of the worst culprits are the 45-year-old managers. It's rarely the sort of Gen Zs. It's the Gen Xers and the boomers and sort of, I'm sort of millennial /X cusp, but it's kind of people my age and above who aren't coming in, who then the people who work for them can't learn. So they're the ones who really suffer. So we basically said we want everybody in 5 days a week. It was 4, now it's 5. Obviously, if you've got a great reason, we'll certainly understand that. And when people come to interview with us, we're very upfront. We say we're a 5 day a week work from office culture. If that doesn't work for you, then that's fine, but probably better off getting a job elsewhere. We're really upfront with people. As well, we've got a team, and I think a lot of, even like a 10% turnover, that's sort of in 7 or 8 years or whatever you've turned over, 7 years you've turned over the whole business. So we've been doing this now really 3 to 4 years, and not at 5 days, but sort of always ahead of the curve. So the vast majority of our team have been hired on that basis. And the people who have stayed are the people who kind of want to work on that basis. So there's very few people who aren't aligned. We've created a team that want to work together, want to collaborate, want to work in person. And some people who sort of are remote just due to when they were hired and they were great people. So we hired someone in rural Queensland during the pandemic. Obviously, they can't come into the office. They will probably love to come into the office, but just geographically can't. So obviously we work around them. But we've got a team of people who'd love to work, come to the office, and we give lunch every day. And there's obviously perks and reasons to come in, but it is a carrot and a stick. We say we do expect you in, but when you do come in, we're going to create the best possible environment we can. We want to create a place you actually really want to come in.
Well, I think there's a lot of gravity in that, and I've lasted pretty late in our pod here because I reckon there's a whole exchange we could have on that. Because we've flowed so well here, I'm getting the time wind up. So I've got some rapid fire for you, and basically I'll just start the sentence and you finish it. You're a pretty quick fire guy. Okay, most startup advice is?
Hire great people, but if someone's not right, then move them on as quickly as you can.
Okay. Corporate executives who talk about innovation are?
Probably deluding themselves to a great respect.
Okay. Investors who have never built anything are?
You say, what was the question? Inventors?
Investors who have never built anything.
I think you'd be a great investor without being a great builder. I don't think the two aren't mutually exclusive. I don't think Warren Buffett really built that much, but a great investment business. I think a lot of great investors just understand what constitutes a great business, but you don't have to have built it to be a great investor, I don't think.
Yeah, no, fair point. I agree on that. I think it's a different skill set of its own, but it's often something who people talk about like, oh, well, what would you know? You've never built anything yourself, so you don't know if they're going to go all the way. But I think a little bit of that's to do with founder spotting that comes up when you're kind of investing in companies as a VC or something like that. Whereas, the VC I'm involved in, Pi Lab, Venture Partners, much smaller than the ones you're probably used to dealing with, but the founder has had 5 exits.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I feel pretty good there, and
I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to have, like a lot of great, Reid Hoffman, a lot of great VCs have worked early stage. Roloff, who runs Sequoia now, but it's not. I think early stage is more important than later stage. So if you're going to be a VC, I think it's helpful to have had founder or early stage experience. If you're going to be like a public markets investor, I don't think you need to have had great operational experience. It really depends which area. I think PE, you could probably benefit from running stuff, but I don't think it's essential. Look at some of the great PE managers in Australia. Most of them haven't worked in. Often, most of them went straight to PE.
Yeah, and they have got a pretty specific lens. You're right. Yeah. All right. Well, what most business podcasts are?
I can't answer most. I love business podcasts. So I think if it's a great business podcast, it's engaging, conversational, and thought invoking.
I'd agree with that. Look, if I look at 2 of my favourite business podcasts, yours is now on the list, and so is Acquired.
Yeah, Acquired's a classic one.
I'm just hearing their perspective. I'm hearing the deep dive. I see proper kind of, analysis and the willingness to debate over it.
Yeah.
But, like what we're getting is insights. We're not just getting the story because it's just otherwise a live read of the news. Kind of thing.
I think you want to try and, if you can learn one thing from a podcast, hopefully listeners have got one thing out of all the garbage I've said in the last hour.
Sometimes,
I think there's one thing that I've said that could be relevant. But like, I listen to Acquired, and there's always a couple of things I'll get out of pretty much every episode. And these are stories of great businesses that build great powers. And and I look at the Costco episode of Acquired, which is sort of the seminal episode. And that really inspired a lot of what we do at Luxury Escapes. And inspired us to sort of change a lot of how we treat things. So I think a great podcast or great book does that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's finish up on this one. The difference between real entrepreneurs and wantrepreneurs is?
Willingness to do the hard work and probably grit.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, you've definitely got plenty of that, Adam Schwab. Thanks very much for coming on Flow Zone today. It's been an incredible chat. I've enjoyed it. We've gone over time for a good reason.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here.
Thank you.